Yeah, yeah. You're
All right.
good. So
All right.
perfect
Awesome.
timing.
All right. All right. Here we go. We are driving it home with the professor. I have on with me today Torin Hill from the Taurus organization. I don't want to screw it up, so in a second he'll tell us what Taurus stands for. I don't think he's the kind of guy you want to get mad at you, from what I could tell. The reason I have Torin on to discuss Taurus uh, is that I have someone that was on the show prior, James Chiarello, who had gone through the Taurus training, and it's something he had actually mentioned in a past episode of Driving It Home with the Professor. And I was like, yeah, whatever, fighting's fighting, combat's combat, and this, that, and the other. He's like, no, man, you have to check it out. You have to check it out. And he sends me these links, and I'm like, yeah, I'll check it out, and I never do. And then for some reason, I think I was reading a thread that you were involved in on Facebook, and I'm like, you know what? Let me check this out. This guy seems to be talking about some interesting stuff, and then I got deeper into it, and then James thankfully connected us. But from my estimation, what I'm seeing that you're doing, having not gone through it, um, is, and having talked to you a little bit, is the fact that, not the fact, but is that you're trying to educate, but also prepare people for the real rigors of life or death combat. And something that you've said, and I've seen you write, is that the current systems in place don't do a very good job, or almost do such a bad job that it becomes dangerous for the people learning these skills on how to defend their lives, or all that kind of stuff. As I fumble through this description, I present to everyone Torren Hill. He could go into a little bit about who he is, what he does, what Taurus is, and then we're going to dig deep into some questions.
Hello. Thanks, Marco. So where do you want me to start? You want to start with who I am?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Other than we already know you're Torren Hill. What's your background? How did you get involved in combat, fighting, martial arts? Do you have any background there?
Yeah. Growing up, I grew up in the 80s, so there was the push. Everybody wanted to be a ninja back then. I'm not sure if everybody here remembers this, but
Shokasugi?
Yeah, Shokasugi, you had to have a chainmail mask and throw shit, and it was the best time ever. Everybody wanted to be a ninja because it was like the pinnacle of masculinity at the time. I don't know how it got there, but it was.
The man caught a coffee cup midair when it was knocked over.
Yeah, and what was it? The Master TV show came out. I'm not sure if you remember that one, with Lee Van Cleef as the Master, not
No,
Asian at all.
not familiar with that one, but the Shokasugi in the ninja movies was a big fan.
Yeah. So growing up, it was like that and MacGyver, and so everybody, was supposed to be comments of, my mom wouldn't buy me GI Joes because she was a hippie. So, and then after she passed away, I moved in with my grandfather, who was a retired lieutenant colonel in one of the services. So, I kind of had this idea around me at the time of like what fighting was, a total classic martial mythology idea of what fighting was. And I had also a veteran grandfather who I grew up with, who was completely dismissive of the whole idea that that's what fighting was, and I couldn't reconcile these two completely different ideas of his distaste for war, and of course my juvenile excitement and fascination with it. So, fast forward, I did the summer of Taekwondo. I think that everybody did at their corner dojo for experience with martial arts there. I did that summer with martial arts. I think I must have been 13 at the time, so that didn't go anywhere. I was really flexible. I could do my kicks. I felt pretty good about that. And I realized, you know what? I'm a really great artist. Totally not that great, but I was passingly good. I thought I was great. So I decided I wanted to go to art school. Ended up in Atlanta working on illustration and being fascinated by anatomy. Went off and dabbled in what was the smart drink movement at the time, which was kind of like this whole nootropics and alternatives to alcohol. And got really fascinated with neurochemistry. So there's this kind of thing where I was like interested in how the brain worked, but not from necessarily a psychological perspective. Really fascinated with how the body worked. Didn't like sports that much. Like rock climbing, like cycling, not stuff that really involved team sports so much. But I really loved it, watching. And this sounds totally dark, but I enjoyed watching serious injuries that came out of sports and kind of how it broke the whole sporting environment. So like a football accident, and the idea that it would just completely decimate the gameplay, how the actual games got played. And I was really fascinated by that idea. Like, okay, look, we're supposed to be this model of fighting, sort of like this proxy for fighting, this combat between the two teams. But when it gets serious, everyone's like, whoa, 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 you know, bring the medics and let's call the whole thing off. So, you know, it's kind of like this weird space that I got into and dabbled again in Taekwondo in Atlanta, just so that I could actually kick high. I came back to San Diego to visit my brother in 1994, and he told me he'd been training with this guy who was doing training for the Navy SEALs at the time, and I was like, yeah, whatever. So that was pretty cool. I should go check this stuff out. And it was this guy who was working at a UCSD at the time and kind of put together his own kind of spin-off program for this program that he had worked with over at Coronado. And it was interesting. It was a cool model with a great group of guys, and I was interested in that. And so I did that for did a 4-year program in 2 years with him. Became an instructor there. Then I immediately started trying to change the program. I have a brain that never leaves anything alone, so I'm constantly trying to improve and fix stuff. And so I really got interested in how can we improve the training side. And so I created this whole other idea of how to train, and the idea of what I referred to as a high-density training model, trying to pack information into people. So we started trying to work on these different ways to kind of improve people's learning. And I got hired by a guy to create a program for him in the martial arts or self-defense community. He gave me a spec of a product that he wanted based upon the work that I was doing at UCSD. So I created a program for him. You know, I'm not trying not to name names, but did that for a while and developed that program, and then got focused on the military law enforcement end and wanted to really deliver a product that actually would help people rather than deliver a product that had, you know, a whole bunch of soccer moms, you know, feeling like they were combat ready when they really weren't. It really kind of had divorced itself at that point in time from kind of the application, which was really where I wanted to be. So from there, that was, would that have been almost 15 years ago now that we got started on this project. So yeah, 2015. So it'd be almost 15 years ago that we got started. So I decided I wanted to make this training program that really focused on how to learn as much as possible. And when that happened, kind of a whole new avenue showed up. Rather than just the combat, the fighting, the application, it became this whole, how do people learn? How does the brain work? How do we, you know, store and recall information? And so I ended up nerding out even harder over in that corner. And combining all these things in kind of this weird path that lines everything up, and being kind of the center of a network of really interesting, fascinating people, I put together the TORIS program to satisfy a request by a federal agency to develop a training program for them. And that's how this got put together in the first place. So it's kind of I keep getting people ask me questions, and then I end up going and trying to solve problems, and then I find out new and fascinating things, and that leads me wildly astray from my original goal.
So it kind of sounds like to me that your real interest lies in working with like the tip of the spear types. Is that right?
I think that would be an accurate statement. I think the biggest thing for me is realizing, you know, where the rubber meets the road, the chemistry is different. So we can practice and talk about things and do things, but those are in the comfort of our own, you know, padded chair and relaxing and sipping hot cocoa with the marshmallows in it. And everyone can do whatever they want and talk about whatever they want, but those guys actually have to go do it. And so one of the things about martial mythology that's really fascinating to me is it's like the metaphor I've used in the past is it's like swimming if there was no water. And you know, or the likelihood of you seeing water is 1/10 of 1%. So you know, you stand in a room and everyone stands up, kind of bends over the waist, and fabricates or notionally tries to paddle their arms as though they're going to jump in the water, but you're never going to see water. And so there's very few opportunities for you to really end up being neck deep or even, you know, panic swimming in the ocean. That doesn't happen. And in martial arts, there's so much masculinity tied to that. And there's so much talk about getting into fights, where, you know, we can talk about exactly what that means later, that it really doesn't apply to what happens when you're trying to save your life with a tool. And those guys at the tip of the spear, they have to save their lives. And so I'm interested in doing as much as I can to help there. And those guys are also the ultimate test subject. You know, they're going to find out if it works or not. They can call bullshit very quickly.
And those guys will, for the most part. The ones that I've come across have very short bullshit fuse.
Yes.
So let me ask you, like, because most of the people that I deal with, right, I'm not gonna say soccer moms because it's not too much, don't get too many soccer moms wanting to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Muay Thai or MMA for that matter. Sometimes you do, but not too many.
Just
But
wait till Reebok buys it.
yeah,
When Reebok buys
exactly.
it,
Yeah, hopefully. So when I spoke to James about it, right, it kind of sounded like he was having the moment with you that I had when I was exposed to UFC #2, right? And that was my first exposure into the martial arts, where I was like, my best friend had tried to get me into doing judo, and he's like, it's awesome, it's great. I'm like, it's bullshit, I don't care. It's guys wearing these funny uniforms. Like, why would I want to do that? And then I see Royce, right, using what he knows, beating these giant guys, right? Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, all this other stuff. And I'm like, I want to do that because that shit's real, right? And
proved it right there.
What's that?
Proved it.
Yeah, he proved it. Exactly. There was no, if I threw this kick, I would knock you out. No, he's like, I'm choking you because I'm choking you. That's how this is how this things work. And when James came back from your training and we spoke about it, it seemed like he had a very similar kind of experience with what he went through with you. It's like all the other stuff, maybe it was bullshit, maybe it wasn't, but it's like, man, I've just had my Royce Gracie moment. And what is giving your and it seems like that your supporters are very fervent about supporting you and supporting your program. What's giving them their Royce Gracie moment when they go through the program?
Well, so actually one of the other guys we referred to as the Mr. Miyagi moment, actually. That where all of a sudden, you've been doing wax on, wax off, and all of a sudden, the guy throws a punch and pow, it's there. You're like, holy crap! What I've been doing actually works. What is, I think, the biggest element of that is that I give people an opportunity. In our training, the format allows an opportunity for people to be, in that UFC #2. It gives them an opportunity to actually test themselves as opposed to watching it vicariously through the screen. They're actually in UFC #2 surviving something that is very difficult and very challenging personally for them. And so they go, okay, I've just had a real litmus test. I've gone through a crucible and I've been able to use skills and test these things at some level that I don't normally get to do. And that creates it's compelling. It creates an opportunity for people to have their own experience in a place where they could very rarely ever get, without trying to survive someone trying to murder you.
Well, right, but I mean, but isn't that kind of relative because if these guys have gone through different types of training before, and the training was hard, or they thought it was hard, right? Maybe it wasn't hard from a kind of a panic mental standpoint, and we'll get into that later. But it's like, yes, this is it. This program X is where it's at. And then they move on to the next program. They move on to the next program, and then they finally get to you. What kind of feedback are you getting from these guys when they say, hey, I've been through X, Y, and Z, but now here back at A, this is the real deal because of what?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I've spent 20 years now. Actually, when I think about it, it's been 20 years now doing training, and I think the thing is that I spent a lot of time trying to focus my bullshit meter and trying to find as close to the truth as we can shade. And so when they get to me, they realize that I don't really have a lot to sell. I'm trying to actually give them as high value information as possible. And so I think when they get to me, they're like, okay, cool, this is a place where, the bullshit's already been ripped out. The problems have already been kind of solved. And now we can actually talk about the legit stuff that really matters. And we can do things with a disregard for, a disregard for hierarchy, a disregard for dogma, a disregard for, egos. We run a pretty flat organization. And so I think people are just, I think one of the things just at a low level that people appreciate about the program is the program itself, how it works, who's in the room with them. It's a different attitude, and actually Jiu-Jitsu has a pretty good community that way. If you're coming in from a lot of other martial arts, it's not necessarily the case. I've been around people who've experienced a lot of things. I think the thing that's more interesting to me is after they leave training with us, and we call them workshops. We try not to call them trainings per se, but after they leave, working with us. they'll go to other things. They'll go, oh shit, Torin, you've ruined this for me. I can't go to these classes anymore. I can't watch movies anymore. I can't watch the UFC anymore. I've given up on competitions. It changes the way they think about why they're building their skills. I think that refocusing that has a value for people that are serious about their training.
And especially for and we're talking about serious about your training. It's like, I don't live in a life or death situation, right? I'm hoping it never comes up, right? I want to go to my car, go to work, come home, play with my kids, and all this other stuff. But these guys are living, they're saying, like, as you corrected me the other day, but the so-called operators or whomever they happen to be, law enforcement, all this other stuff, are living with the threat of death or violence just about every day. But now, if they're getting kind of ruined to the other modalities, don't they need those modalities to take them to you, right? Like, you don't want a white belt. You don't want a guy with no experience. I would think that the tip of the spear guy needs the experience to get to you, and then with his experience, kind of what's happening.
Yeah, I think what I mean by that idea that it's ruined for them is that they can now the scales have fallen from their eyes, if you will, and they can see where the value lies in their regular training, and they can also perceive exactly where the bullshit begins and why they no longer need to go down that. So it really, I've likened it to wind tunnel testing in some degrees. Like, if you are looking to improve the quality of your Formula One vehicle, you should wind tunnel test. If you're driving an Edsel, it's a waste of time and money. You don't take that to the wind tunnel. Nobody needs to refocus the value of that Hugo or that Yugo that you're driving. It doesn't make any sense. So if you're in it for fun, if you're in it for health, fitness, confidence, all the things that used to say on the Taekwondo flyers that used to get pinned to everybody's house, if you're in it for those things, then cool, go do those things. It's great. Martial arts has a tremendous offering socially, but for the armed professional, they don't have a long enough training cycle. They don't have the budgets. They don't have the time. They have other things they need to focus on. And so going through the kind of cyclic nature of training, and especially on a long-term cycle, doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for them. And they want something that's going to potentially save their life tonight. And that's where our focus is. So when they go back to a lot of these things, they go, okay, I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't care about the next belt. I don't care if I go to the Pan Ams. I need to survive tonight. And that changes the way that they look at their own effort. That changes the way they look at their own training. It changes the experience changes people. Experience changes people, right? So.
Right. Now, do you so the good majority of the people that you're starting to get now, is it word of mouth? Are they finding you through some sort of research? Because that could also change the idea of why they're coming. Because I doubt you're getting very many skeptics once they get to you, because you're pretty high up on the food chain for the skeptics to kind of have already fallen off. Is that right?
No, I try to actually we try to entertain I'm a skeptic at heart. That might be part of why Torres came out in the first place. But we actually we enjoy skeptics because we want people calling bullshit. If what I'm saying isn't true or doesn't work or has little value, and it's only drawing people in who are already, they show up and they've got this big Kool-Aid stain around their mouth, that doesn't help me. It doesn't help them. It doesn't help the guy standing next to them. So we focus on getting people who are skeptics. Quite honestly, that's who we like to teach. People who are interested in doing something that's going to go, and they're skeptical of sometimes even their own training. They say, okay, that's the delta here, is that they're not necessarily true believers in their own thing. They show up skeptical of us, but they're skeptical of the entire kind of game. And they're like, okay, maybe there's a better way to do this. I've done it the way that all these different guys who are luminaries in the field have said, and I don't really feel like I necessarily still have the answer, or there's still lingering doubts about its application or something. Those guys show up and they're skeptical to begin with, and those are our primary students. We've had a lot of people come in and say, well, I'm not really sure this is going to work. And at the end of the second day, I offer them their money back, and they say, hell no, when can I sign up for the next one? So, we're not really working so much on the seminars are kind of a newer focus. The workshops are kind of a newer focus. We're looking more at federal law enforcement. And we don't know who's going to be stepping into the training. So, we're going to get skeptics, true believers, and other things. People who say, yeah, this is a horse shit, but I should be doing Krav Maga instead. know,
Right.
whatever.
So, and some of the guys so some of the guys have to go to this training. Is that what you're saying?
So that's the structure we're working on, is kind of revamping training for a particular agency, and so you know if we can get that to happen, then everybody that goes through it would end up going through our program at some level.
Well, because I've on a much more basic level training some recruits, or not even recruits, but guys going through the police academy, and you'll get these guys that be like, they're big and like, oh well, that doesn't work, or that doesn't, or this is bullshit, big dude and all this. It's like, all right, well, let's get to the end of it, and let me show you why it works, kind of thing. So, but that was, since I was doing that pro bono, that was a giant pain in the ass dealing with those guys. But
yeah, I've experienced that quite a bit. I've had people take swings at me. I've had people. I'm kind of over that aspect of it. I had people who, this stuff didn't work, and I've had to hit people pretty hard. I don't enjoy that. That's not really why I'm there. So at that level, that I don't really think that's skepticism so much as just being a dickhead.
Yeah. I was gonna say asshole, but dickhead.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that. But there's a point in time where you can only teach someone who's willing to be taught. And if a guy shows up and he's a rock, then all you can do is hack at it, and hopefully it turns into a sculpture, but you can't be sure.
So let me ask you, so the current, I teach, from a self-defense standpoint, I teach Gracie Jiu-Jitsu self-defense, right? Elio Gracie has it as it filtered down to me. From just from a one-to-one technique standpoint, are you looking at these things as these are viable? Some of them are viable, some aren't. You know what I'm saying? Like, have you broken it down from that standpoint as well? Like, particularly saying, hey, I know in Taekwondo they teach you to do this, that doesn't work in this situation, or in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu they say do this, but what you need, you can't do this, so forth and so on. So
how should I put this? There's two kind of different tracks that could have started at the beginning of this. One of them was to kind of go the Jeet Kune Do sort of path of like, okay, or even if we look at at the root of Krav Maga, if we look at how this stuff started, which is that you take an ad hoc collection of techniques and you kind of pick your favorite or the favorite of the inventor, and then you say these are the shit. We're going to do these things because they kick ass, and this is how it's going to go. And so everyone practices those techniques because
the instructor could teach the shit out of them too.
Oh yeah, he's the best in the world. Like if Joe Rogan had a martial art, it'd be a sidekick, right? That would be it. Right? Because he's phenomenal at it. Right. So it's the thing that they're great at, and usually the students tend to usually be built like them. They tend to look like them, behave like them, and that's part of that hero worship. We can get into a different discussion there. That's one path, and then I wanted to go the other route, which is, okay, let's say all this stuff is horseshit. Let's just totally scrape the tablet clean and say, where should we begin? Where do we start? Let's throw martial arts out. Let's throw training out and begin with a completely clean table and start from, what are we even trying to do here? Like, what is this really trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? And then slowly start building it back to where we start looking at physicality. So to that end, we ended up going not so much focusing on techniques, but we ended up really looking at emergency medicine and sports injury. How do people get hurt? And then how do people get hurt in low velocity, low energy impacts, not car accidents? So one of the guys that contributed, Dr. Lindsay Dutch Johnson, is a phenomenal guy. He's, I believe, a PhD in structural engineering, master's in mechanical engineering. His entire career has been focused on soft tissue injury. So he was also a student of mine, a great guy, brilliant engineer, and worked for one of the largest injury biomechanics companies in the nation, and is a specialist in the field. And I approached him and said, hey, let's look at what it is that we can find that is debilitating from an emergency medicine standpoint. So because if they show up in the ER, we know it's probably pretty bad. It's not something that they can walk off, right? So we start from the emergency room. Then from there we go and we look into sports injury and see, can two bodies colliding do this? Can two bodies impacting each other actually do this, or does it need someone flying off a BMX bike doing 80? Right? Can we hurt ourselves at a lower level? And then we get into, okay, what is the long-term impact from that, from an injury perspective, from medical management? Then we got into an epidemiology perspective, which is, okay, what is the likelihood of these injuries happening? How frequently do they occur? What is the average? How many traumatic brain injuries are there every year in the U.S.? From that information, because then it could happen, but incredibly unlikely, well, that doesn't have a lot of merit. So teaching you that, oh, well, if you punch the guy in the chest, his heart will stop, that's horseshit. It's happened, but it's usually happened to 10-year-olds who get hit with the baseball, and that's why they
Look,
have.
it happened on TV, so.
Well, yeah, and then we get in a whole other discussion. So we looked at where do these things go, and then the missing piece from that, and this is the specialty that Dr. Johnson really brings to the table, is we said, okay, we know what the injury is. We know what the pieces of tissue are that get damaged. How much energy does it take to do that? How can we recreate those loading factors? And so we would say, okay, we look into the research. We would actually do the calculations to figure out here if we load the anterior calcaneal ligament here from this angle at this amount of force, it'll tear here and here, and we'll get a class 3 rupture. Okay, well, that's a great way to break an ankle. How can we look at how to break that ankle? Oh, well, if we stomp on it here, if we throw a sack of rocks on it from here, it doesn't really matter about the technique. It matters about what's happening in the human body. And so that was kind of the genesis of this whole idea.
So you took it from the ER back, right? It's like, all right, the guy's in. How did I put him in the ER, right? And then worked your way back.
Exactly. Okay. Because the other idea is, well, if I punch you, this happens, is horseshit. Right? It's just, and it gets said every single day. Oh, you do this and such happens. Like, well, how do you know? Who knows? When was the last time that got tested? Like back in 4th century BC China, when people believed in ghosts and energy meridians. Like, I don't buy it. And so seeing like people that are doing like still today practicing no-touch knockouts, I'm not believing it. And this is something that UFC 2 helped prove to us. Is like, well, that's supposed to do stuff. You said, I kick you and it knocks you out, or I punch you like this, and that would kill a man. Says who? Based on what? Where do we have this data? And it doesn't exist in the field. It's missing.
Right. And so people are kind of clear. We're kind of looking at we're talking about a couple different things, because UFC's fighting, and you're talking about combat, right? I mean, and
so let's go back a step, because if we look at the UFC at the early days, right, it was no eye gouges, no fish hooks. Right, so
that was pretty close to combat, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's what Paul Harris, right? He obviously doesn't care if he breaks somebody's leg, right? So
but still, it's two gentlemen brawlers, right? That's what I call people in the cage. These are two gentlemen that have trained and decided that getting in the cage is what they're going to do, and they've toughened their body and in some degrees toughened their mind, and they've increased their skill and their technique. And look, they're badass motherfuckers, right? They're bad dudes. If you walk into that cage today, if you have a contract with the UFC, it's like being in the NBA fighting, right? Yep. But that's not everybody, right?
Yeah.
But everybody's training like that because they think they could do that.
I'm gonna reveal a kind of an upsetting secret, and that is that even people in special operations are looking at the UFC and looking at MMA as though it's the truth for combat application. That we should be looking at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, Kali, knife fighting. We should be looking at these things as though they're the truth of combat, and they're absolutely not. And it's kind of to me, it's an upsetting trend, because it has, it's gone full circle to where the myth, maybe there was an incident of real combat at some point in time. All the myths spun out, and it's come all the way around to where we're drinking the bathwater, and now we're going to go out and we're going to make kind of the lies true by trying to apply them in modern combat.
So, do you see any benefit to the end user that's in the Navy SEALs or Delta or pararescue jumper in the Air Force, to outside of doing what you do, right? Is there a benefit for him to box? Is there a benefit for him to do Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, grappling, and all that other stuff?
Sure. I mean, from a foundational perspective, sure. If it was, I would assume they would have already done it, before they signed up for the contract. I would assume they would have already done those sorts of things. To tell people in a pre-deployment workup that this is what you should do if you're in a low visibility situation, hands get put on you, and you should out MMA somebody, to me is I think it's a little bit wrong-headed. But whatever, I'm an asshole, so no one's asking me. But but that's I don't think that's necessarily the route that. As if we really look at what we're trying to do, we look at the difference between the pantomime and the event, right? It's freaking somebody on the dance floor versus actual sex. They look kind of similar, but no one's getting, well, not too many people are getting pregnant on the dance floor.
Right.
And that's the problem is, MMA looks like a fight. It looks like legitimately looks like a fight, but all of the circumstances that surround it aren't accurate. Like you said, they're gentlemen brawlers, they're duelers, and combat in its essence is not dueling.
So, is there, and you talk about the pre-deployment workup, and I don't understand what that means, but I'm just going to let that one slide. But so it sounds like that's something that, once they get to you, like, okay, man, you should already know this stuff, right? Your elbows, your knees, and all this other stuff. And you get to me, now I'm showing you where they need to go to work to the best of their ability to incapacitate this person that's trying to kill you, right? Now, is there any benefit to the SEAL or the pararescue jumper to continue training in the arts that he really likes, or something that he kind of maybe just disagrees? He's like, hey, I still like boxing, or I like doing jiu-jitsu, or I see the benefit,
I think what you will find, and Marco, you are coming in, whether you like it or not, but you will find that when you get through the simulator, we're not dismissing those skills. We're actually exploiting them. We're taking advantage of them. So I don't think people should drop training to come to Taurus. That's not really what we're there for.
Okay.
Really not our model. The idea is not that you should jettison this training because it's crap. It's that you should be able to pick and choose where the quality is for what you want. And if you're looking to experience the hierarchy, if you want to develop your technical acumen, then hell yeah, why wouldn't you go through a martial art and try to progress all the way to master? It makes absolute sense. If you're looking to be the best fighter you can be, those aren't necessarily the same tracks. They kind of become two different things. At a certain point in time, you and I both know, at a certain point in time, a lot of martial artists don't even fight that much. So the progression to their top level of their mastery is not really about them becoming masters of their fighting ability anymore. That was done earlier. And it becomes much more subtle, much more nuanced. Sometimes it becomes total horseshit. Just depends on which art they are. But the reality is that people get the skills at a foundational level pretty early, and then you're on the track that culture or that kind of group, that in group has developed. So you can learn how to do leg locks on day one, as an example. I mean, shit, they teach 6-year-olds in Sambo how to do leg locks.
Right.
You come to me, and I'm not going to teach you leg locks until you're 3-year game. For whatever reason, right? We can fabricate whatever reasons we want. They can be legitimate, but it's about how we set the culture up to when we're going to reveal these things to you. And in some way, they are kind of revelatory. Like, okay, now get ready. I'm going to change everything. I'm going to give you the secret handshake, and I'm going to take you into this nether realm of secret technique that you've never experienced before. And then people go, oh my God, this is crazy. Like I'm learning something. I'm progressing. Things are getting ever more complicated. That's not necessarily doing a service to the people who are armed professionals who lay their lives down for us. And it's a whole different track, and it's good, it's enriching, absolutely enriching. But I don't think it's necessarily, has the highest level of combat validity. And I think that's what I'm trying to help people focus at the teaching level for you and me. Help us figure out, okay, why are you here? And maybe that means we have a different program for the track you want to go in. Maybe it's an audit program as opposed to a graduate program. You get to attend the classes, but you're not working towards a degree. Maybe that's the way we go. Maybe, hey, you know what? I'm going to work with you specially on the stuff that's going to apply when you're wearing equipment, which we never do in our regular classes. So there's things that change, and we have to, as instructors, our job is to figure out what does the client need, what does a customer need, and how can we give them their actual goal as opposed to stuffing them into the kind of the track. This is what we complain about in education. Oh, well, we're tracking the kids, and that's terrible, and the kids aren't going to be able to rise at their own level. And you're like, well, that's kind of how, public education works. And then we look at the martial arts, and we go, oh, crap, we're guilty of it here. We look at training cycles, we go, crap, we're guilty of it here. It's like, how can we really give people the best, most focused training for their needs? And then the question becomes, what does the student really need?
So, outside of because the Taurus, but Taurus seems like it's, looking at the website, it's almost like don't get mad if I'm getting wrong, but like a module, right? And somebody comes in and they experience this module, and then they go back to their regular day-to-day, and then at another time they say, hey, I need to kind of go through this module again, right? Now, I'm talking to James. He was with you for 2 days, I think, when you guys were in Manhattan.
Yeah, that was a 2-day workshop. Yeah, 20 hours in 2 days.
So he came back with 30 pages of notes, which is.
I like to talk.
What's that?
No, yeah, there's a lot of information there.
That's an awful lot of information. I don't know what I could do for 20 hours to kind of give 30 pages of notes, but for me, you touched upon it just a second ago, but like as an instructor, you know what I'm saying? And I'm a guy that doesn't have access to Taurus, or my guy can't make it to Taurus. Can you get a little bit deeper into what you think would be the important bits for me to express to this guy? Is like, somehow this Navy SEAL made it to Maple Shade, New Jersey, and this is what he needs to be either good at, or this is the mindset he needs to be in. By the way, Maple Shade's a little town, not very many Navy SEAls there.
Yeah, all none of them. Yeah, so I guess the question becomes, what are we trying to do? And that is, and because there's a Bakhtin sort of heteroglosy going on here, where some guy says, well, I want to get training, and when he says training, he has an image in his mind of what that means. And when we hear training, as instructors, we know what we think that means. And so this trying to kind of make those gears fit and go, oh, okay, that's what you meant when you said that word. That's a challenge, and it's kind of difficult. When people come to me and they say, I want to train with you, normally I say, no, you don't, because it sucks. But people say, I want to train with you. I don't necessarily provide training. What we do isn't really training. That's kind of why we shade away from that word. We don't really train people in the kind of the definition. So if someone comes into you and says, hey, I want to get good at fighting, like, well, how do you spell that, right? Is it F-I-T-E? So it's like, I want to punch and kick and everything else. Or is it F-I-G-H-T, right? Or is it like, I want to be good at, verbally abusing people in the street? Like, you're like, well, what do you really mean by fighting? And then it says, oh, well, I want to put bullets into bad guys. And then I want something as a support device for that if my gun goes down. Okay, well, that's going to change everything about, I was thinking we were going to go do this, but now that you're here in Maple Shade, New Jersey, now it's time to really focus on something else. Let's go ahead and get you, let's get rid of, how to tie a belt. Let's get rid of, let's get rid of how to fall well and work on our fluidity. Let's not worry about our hip flexibility. Let's not worry about all these different warm-ups. You know what? Fuck it, let's just jump ahead to purple belt stuff. And I'm going to cover down on the things that are informative, effective, require the least amount of setup, are kind of somewhat tricksy, things that we can kind of get into the fight that aren't as obvious, don't require upper body isolation the same way, let's say, setting an arm lock does. So like looking at a Kimura armbar or whatever, those sorts of things require a little bit more upper body manipulation and expose you to some guy biting you, because you're going to be dealing with guys who are enjoy getting wet or doing PCP. So what my fight is different than your fight. What training is different than your training. So we really have to identify, as instructors, we have to figure out, what does this guy need to solve the job.
So it sounds like you're addressing, which is a major problem in the martial arts, and it's the problem of selling people the system rather than helping them with what they need, right? And we get right. So because we get it all the time, and I've been, and this is just as an aside, been to different martial arts business seminars, and they help you on how to run your business. And I went to one where they say, we were the only jiu-jitsu guys in the room with a bunch of karate guys, and one of the guys with me says, well, what am I supposed to do when a guy asks me if I teach nunchucks? He's like, you tell him you teach nunchucks. You get that guy through your door. And I'm like, really? We're going to tell him we teach nunchucks? We don't even know where to buy them. Yeah, so like what?
They're illegal here, yeah.
Right, but the martial arts, and I think jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, very much less so than a lot of the other martial arts. Don't sell that bill of goods, but even yet, just now, having this kind of revelation with you is like, man, if a guy's tip of the spear and he's coming to me, I'm not I'm not teaching tip of the spear people. You know, I don't have a he needs to be in a room with other tip of the spear guys, right? And he needs to be pushed like a tip of the spear guy needs to be pushed, and I need to be able to say to him, "Hey man, you know what? I can train you in these ways, and then later I have my friend in California who's going to do stuff to you, and then you're going to come back and say, Jesus, it was awesome, but why did you send me to that guy?" And I'm referring to you.
Now I hate you, right? Yeah. So then the question, you know, if we look at this honestly, we say, okay, we have a program, and it might be a brilliant program, but it's not always designed. It's not one size fits all, right? And we might have, like, I think personally, I think Gracie's have hands down the best children's training on the planet. Like, forget sending them to karate, forget sending anyone to anything. Send them to the Gracie Children's Program because it's the best educational model that exists for children's training. But I wouldn't send somebody who's, you know, trying to satisfy an SF contract. I wouldn't send them to go do the children's class. I wouldn't say, this is the best training model, go do that, because he's like, well, you know, and I'm beating up a bunch of, you know, 5-year-olds, and, you know, I'm hugging the thing, and I'm hugging the thing, and I'm, you know, kicking the kids in the head. I just don't feel like it's fair. Or he sets up this wrong expectation of what a fight is. And he's like, well, this is really bizarre because the guy actually tried to stab me, and none of the toddlers was trying to stab me in that class. It kind of seems a little bit weird. I seem like a little bit misguided now. And I like to use that as an idea because it shows the disparity between, yes, it's a great model, but it does not satisfy everything. And at some level, there's the difference between being a true instructor, you know, such as yourself, a real professor, and someone who's interested in actually communicating the truth, and then actually being a hokey salesperson. Right, the guy comes in, he's interested, you know, he's going for his buds, and, you know, he's looking to go through and become a member of a team, and he comes to you and you're trying to sell him patches, and, you know, if you have the blue gi, you have the white gi. I mean, come on, you got to mix and match, brother.
Right.
Like, at that point in time, you know, you're a dick if that's what you're doing to people, because you're basically selling them horse shit that they don't need, and you know it, they don't know it yet, and so you're literally like manipulating little old ladies for their money at that point in time. And is it a condemnation of the field? Yeah, absolutely. I'm an asshole. I'll call the truth. A lot of guys are selling bullshit. It's a lot of, you know, I've worked with people who are, you know, snake oil salesmen. I didn't realize it at the time, but, you know, as we went on, I was like, wow, you know, it's an awful lot like, you know, like a sales model rather than an actual educational model.
Yeah, they become, you know, they teach you to become business model. And look, the doors have to stay open somehow, right? I mean, there's a certain aspect of it that we got to have websites, and we got to, you know, we have to take money, right? There's nothing evil there, but we can't be lying to people, right?
Right. No, I agree with that. You know, I'm not anti-capitalist. I'm just anti-lying to motherfuckers. And I think it's fair. So that's the issue, I guess. You know, the reality of this is there's so much out there, and so little of it has value. And there's a lot of people that are just paying the rent, you know, trying to, you know, keep the dojo open, trying to pay their mortgage. Hell, they may even have 5 schools, and they're doing a great job. But they're not teaching combat skill. And, you know, they have a room full of people. We've all seen the video of guys, you know, all black belts that are throwing these terrible kicks. You know, they get passed around. They're on Facebook. Yeah. Everyone's like, oh, this is a martial art. This is ridiculous. And we all look at it. A lot of times people who are laughing at it don't realize that they're that guy too, right? And they don't realize it because the way that we measure it is different. We're looking at those guys saying, haha, they're jokesters. But then you go in and you'll try to, you know, convince guys that need to go fight someone for their life that they should practice with markers and a bongo drum to get ready for a knife fight. You're like, this just doesn't scan. And you don't realize, you know, not you personally, but people don't realize that at every level, until you get kind of to that tip of the spear, at every level there's someone above you. There's someone who's doing the job righter than you. And so it's easy to point the finger. It's hard to point at yourself.
Now, the tip of the spear guys, you know, coming to you, and they're getting this, you know, this high level of experience, right? You know, there's just this experience that every video I've watched, and every, you know, what did I refer them? Tough guys go in and a sweaty glazed mess comes out, right?
That's exactly what you use, yeah.
So, and I can understand why these tip of the spear likes are going through that. But now let's take it a step back, right? You're not tip of the spear, but you want to be prepared for, quote unquote, the street. You know, is what you put people through necessary for that preparation?
Okay, so that's an interesting. There's kind of a little backstory that I did kind of prep that statement with. The experience is a relative experience that seems consistent for each person. So what I mean by that is we tailor the experience for the individual going through the simulator. So we'll dial up this, we'll dial down that. You are physically deconditioned. That guy's just got done running a series of marathons. You guys aren't on the same level, but your experience can be the same. The level of envelope pushing for you can be the same, even if it's not necessarily the same absolute level, if that makes sense.
Gotcha, right. So I don't need to be the guy that blew through buds to get the benefit of what you do.
Right. Then that's an issue. I know a lot of people who've come to a program like, oh crap, I don't know that I could do this, or I would never be able to survive that. Classic examples we talked the other day. Jake Ellenberger from the welterweight in UFC is contracted with us, and he's going through our program. And the guy's he's a physical monster, and he's doing stuff that I haven't really seen other people do. And to him, it's terrible. But if anybody else did it, they would just die. They'd just be like, all right, that's it, I'm dead. So there's no reason to put someone through the sort of program that Ellenberger's going through, and I wouldn't do that to people. It doesn't necessarily benefit them. And at that same level, I wouldn't put the next guy down. I wouldn't go through, push that all the way out to, oh, you're a soccer mom? Well, guess what? Crack in the face, and next thing you know, we're dragging you in the other room and stuffing a sock in your mouth and waterboarding you. Like that doesn't get us to a valuable place. And so it's about it pushing out people's understanding of their own capacity. That's really where the experience is. And in a lot of ways, that change in appreciation of your own abilities is part of the goal for us from what does the simulator do perspective.
So from a standpoint of kind of, all right, so, and I know Ellenberger, he was a Marine, correct?
Former Marine, yes, sir.
Former Marine.
I guess technically he is a Marine, but
he's a Marine, right? You never. I think they say you're never an ex-Marine. You're always a former Marine. I don't quite understand, but anyway.
I have a friend who says you can't change a Marine. They'll walk around in that diaper all day. But,
the cranking up the dials, right? So when you're dealing with Ellenberger, are you cranking up different dials than you would be cranking up for a guy that's on SEAL Team 6, or are those dials kind of similar based upon the kind of the high-level rigors, even though they might be different? Are these dials kind of the same?
Yeah, someone we haven't worked with anyone from Dev Group, but if we were, or they have a new name now, but if we were doing that, maybe there would be a different series, or there'd definitely be different dials per se, because what they need to do from the mission specifics would be different. We need to do this for our job. An elite athlete has to do that for his job. Ellenberger is really the first athlete that we had really go through this program as a way to modify his performance in his athletic endeavor. But what would be demanded of them would absolutely be different, because Ellenberger doesn't have to handle the medical end, the tactical end. He doesn't have to deal with those same sorts of things. He has to punch and kick and grapple and do all the things we expect it to happen in a fight. But part of I'm not going to use the word genius, but part of the allure of the simulator for me is that it is an integrated effort. So you have to do your full skill set, not just your punch and kicky, but you also have to be able to have your marksmanship. You have to be able to have your tactical awareness. You have to make your target discrimination, your threat assessment, your challenge commands, your movement, your prisoner handling. All these things have to be displayed in the simulator under crushing stress. So for me, that's the part where it starts to get really interesting at that level.
So how difficult was it to kind of finesse the simulator to maximize what you could get out of Ellenberger?
Well, for us, then this is we're calling it Project Juggernaut. This has been a. I
just thought that was Ellenberger's nickname, so that's a name for the project.
Yeah, that's actually his nickname, but we termed it Project Juggernaut. So we've established that there's kind of two different people there, and this is kind of true of all of us. But I can get into specifics on this idea a little bit later. But we did a 2.5-hour interview with him just to make sure that he was even viable. As far as would our work help him? Would this be a good fit, etc. The stuff that we ended up doing for him, like what we're working on for him, is the first time that we've really tried to focus on somebody's athletic effort. So we don't normally put an effort into tuning someone's striking or tuning someone's grappling. That's kind of, quite honestly, it's outside of my skill set. It's not what I do. So we've brought in, area experts from another affiliate with us, a guy that works with us. He runs a group of guys that are specialists in striking and grappling. He's got a lot of former athletes there and active athletes there as well. So we bring him for the technical end in the same way that I would bring in someone from a medical end. I wouldn't teach advanced combat life-saving skills. I would leave that off to somebody else. But I would demand that you perform those skills, but I wouldn't necessarily be the one teaching them. So for Ellenberger, it's been a new effort for us in so much as, okay, this is a new batch of skills. We're not really familiar with kind of dabbling in the technical aspects of it. So in that same way, let's say, a James or Josh, those guys can come in and they have immense technical skill, right? They're BJJ black belts, so judo black belt. So one of those guys is, very active in training and is active, in a special operations community as well. Having those guys come in and telling them, okay, well, that's not how you're supposed to shrimp. That would be kind of stupid of me, right? That'd be a big waste of my time, their time, and I would probably be wronger than wrong, right? They would know how to do all the skills. So for us, the big change here has been actually kind of getting into that nitty-gritty of, okay, how's your foot, how's your hip when you're throwing this strike? Should this be doing that? And now I want you to represent those are the new kind of technical requirements for what we're expecting out of you. As opposed to, okay, do a proper 9-line and medevac this guy correctly while you're under stress. Now it's like, okay, now you have to represent perfect technique while you're under stress. So kind of our focus with Ellenberger. So,
and so it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds pretty plug and play, right? It's like, okay, we're taking, I don't know what a 9-line is, but we're taking the medevac aspect of it out and we're adding the wrestling aspect in. So your wrestling coach is coming in and saying, okay, this is what he needs to be doing here, and this is how he needs to look when he's doing it, blah blah blah, this, that, and the other.
We've decoupled it originally. It was supposed to, in our mind, we're like, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've spent 15 of them saying, actually more. I've spent 18 years or 19 years now saying this is absolutely not MMA. This is not UFC. Those guys do that. We do this. Totally different things. They're not compatible. They're not cross. They don't cross pollinate. It has nothing to do with each other. I sounded more in the early days. I probably sounded more like the guys from Krav Maga. Oh, you don't know. Like if it really went down, I poke eyes and kick groins, and you guys aren't allowed to do that. So it would be real. And then I realized, well, holy shit, no, that's not really what we do. What we do is we basically make people perform at their absolute pinnacle, and we force that out of people.
Right. So you're living what you're saying. Do you know what I'm saying? Because if special ops guy is coming to you and they want to be able to kill people better, right? Well, you're going to help them kill people better. This athlete wants to be a better athlete. Now you're figuring out a way to make that happen.
Right. I mean, it doesn't even much more. It's become even more surface related than originally. Before it was like, well, we have skills here. We understand this field pretty well from an injury perspective, and from a methodology perspective. Then it's become even more, well, what does the customer really want? And if Jake wanted to come over and get disqualified from every single fight, shit, I got that handled. I wouldn't have to call anybody in for that. But if he actually wants to perform well and actually go forward in his career, we need to go bring in people that can help build that for him. So in some ways, this would work for anybody in any skill set, in any sporting event.
And how about outside of like physical skill sets? Do you get people reporting back to you? I'm smarter. I'm dealing with stress better. All these other things.
Stress better. We have one guy described this. Let me see if I can even pull this up here while we're talking, because it's a pretty powerful thing. If you'll forgive me reading it to you.
Go for it.
But I'll look for this while we're on here. But the commentary about where the value is. I'll skip reading this to you. It is really great and it's powerful and everything else, but you have better things to do with today than listen to my droning voice reading.
I've listened to it now for 54 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah. So sorry, me trying to sound out words might not be the best video. But the idea is, he said, does Taurus has helped me. He's talking about the true practice. A great client, actually, if you've ever seen our testimonial videos, he's the guy that said that was the most terrifying thing in a different way.
He's the guy. He's the brown guy, right?
No, he's the former Swedish Army guy that looks like he's a white guy, blonde hair, completely shell shocked,
So
looking
he's
sweat all
completely opposite than the brown guy. He's the
yeah,
he's the
basically pretty much this Nordic looking fella. Yeah.
Right.
So, but one of the things he said, he's like, you know, he's talking about the idea of this practice, the idea of the true practice kind of helps you become, you know, better. It helps you become a full person, a full human. And he says, you know, Taurus is one of those things. It's helped me. You know, it helped me when it helps me swim in shark-infested waters, which is something he enjoys doing. Like he likes going like what he calls pelagic swimming.
That's not a euphemism for anything else. That's
No, he actually enjoys swimming in waters with sharks in them. That's like what he does. He says, you know, it helped me when my father was dying in my arms. It helped me, you know, it helps me in every day. Helps me deal with things like, you know, food tastes better. And it's one of those things where, you know, being able to find out who you are at a certain level, being able to break a threshold that's ahead of you that you really honestly don't think you can do, and essentially for some people it's as close as you're going to get to dying without actually dying. For some people at that level, that training level, to get there is this incredibly empowering experience. Even though it knocks your dick in the dirt, it's a totally empowering experience. And when he gets done, he manages stress better. He manages stress in life better. Like his father literally died in his arms. It's one of these things where these are the things that he's actually able to manage better because of experience. And those are the things that I wouldn't write that on the website because, you know, that shades into the whole like, oh, well, this is, you know, it's going to improve your self-confidence. Like, well, fuck, being good at anything improves your self-confidence.
It's a byproduct of what's going on.
Absolutely. And it's a byproduct of what happens really when anybody is able to do something for themselves at a level that they just couldn't imagine previously. A level of self-mastery, as he describes it in this video.
That's pretty, that's pretty powerful because, you know, most of us that have been involved in the martial arts, and this guy, how many workshops has he done, or how much kind of training time has he had with you?
So that was after 5 turns working with us in the simulator for his first time. So that was at the end. That was the culmination of probably 12 hours, 13 hours of working with us.
So you were able to accomplish in 13 hours where some guys don't accomplish that in 15 years of you know, like hardcore martial arts training. That they don't reach that level of self-mastery or kind of confidence or dealing with stress. It's pretty amazing stuff to have that, you know, to have that said about your program.
It's not, I mean, what we're doing isn't what, I mean, to be fair, and then is that we're talking apples and oranges there. That there's a process that people go through for the training. It's different than the process they go through with Taurus. And I don't want to compare them and say, well, in a day he accomplished with us in a day.
Right, no, for sure. No, I completely get that, right? You know, no, but it just kind of like just looking at it like, fuck, man, I could do this. It took me 20 years to get here. Let me go see let me go see the guys at Taurus and, you know, add to what I got now. You know.
Right. Yeah. And the interesting part for me, the fascinating part for me is that, you know, these are people who aren't new to this, right? And fuck, that guy likes to swim in shark waters for fun. Right. That's like his thing. And then he comes to me and he's like, wow, that was stressful. Sweet, I guess mission accomplished. I have guys like, I've got guys who've been, in combat situations and say, that was worse than combat. I've had guys who, in special operations who I asked them, hey, would we be able to partner up on some training stuff? And then they came through our training and they said, it would be an honor to work with you. That was the most difficult thing I've ever done. And this is from a guy who's, got ARCOMs in Iraq and Afghanistan. Army, commendation for action.
Thank you for explaining that, because I was like, I don't want to look stupid. Oh yeah, the ARCOM. Yeah.
I got that. Yeah. So these are people who aren't new to this. And they're people who aren't new to being shot. There are people who aren't new to having people try to stab them or successfully stab them. There are people who are new to the horrors that humans are willing to inflict upon each other, and yet they're able to come in here and, in a safe setting, do for themselves something that they really can't get anywhere else, and that's why we.
And in our private conversations, one of the big things that you really talk about is that that you're low to or no incident of injury.
Yeah, currently we have a 0 student injury rate, and I say in this current incarnation, the way we're doing this now, mostly because I personally am shattered. I'm broken from trying to train hard. Part of Taurus is a representation not just of what I'm trying to do for other people, but trying to keep people from doing what I did. Like, don't follow my footsteps. It's dumb. Don't do it this way. It's really, really stupid. I've got a bad neck. I've got a bad back. I've got bad knees. I've got bad wrists. I've got, you name it. I've got it.
Yeah, you sound like me.
Yeah, you know exactly how it is. And part of it is, training with guys who put a premium on, well, if you get the shit kicked out of you, that means you did it right. This kind of Pat Miletich idea of like, well, in training, it's going to be harder than any fight. And it's sounds good on the surface, but just burns through people. And you get very little out of it besides permanent injury.
But that also sells well to 20-somethings.
And that's exactly when I got involved, right? If we look at what we're doing at some level, and this is part of, we can argue that this is part of why MMA has taken off, is that we did a great job of selling masculinity to lost men. That the American doesn't have a rite of passage, and wearing board shorts and getting tribal tattoos and hooting and hollering and shaking the branches like a juvenile is where it's at, and so we end up cultivating a group of people who seek out bar fights to prove themselves to themselves.
So,
and that's not the same thing.
Let me ask you, let's. Not that I was trying to avoid talking about Ellenberger, but like I said, and this is no slight on him, but
it's not the focus.
But it's also the least interesting aspect to me, being a guy that's trained guys in MMA. And look, I mean, he's an amazing fighter. I'm not trying to diminish that, but let's talk about Ellenberger now, so that some of the people that are really the MMA heads that have gone this far, 1 hour, 1 minute into our conversation.
Thanks for your stamina.
Yeah, I have plenty of jokes, but maybe for later. Quantifiably, from so he's not sparring, right, when he's going through the simulator, but he's going through something, right? What kind of feedback are you getting from him when he's doing his grappling, when he's doing his sparring, when he's doing his boxing, when he's working on his skills outside of working with you? How is that being reported back to you with the benefits of what he's doing with you?
It has completely changed his game. So it has changed his, literally it's changed his perception of time. And this sounds kind of weird, so bear with me, but his perception of speed and time has changed dramatically. There's a thing that happens to people in very high stress situations. It also happens to people in a Csikszentmihalyi sort of flow state. Or Csikszentmihalyi, sorry, is the guy who wrote the book about flow. Kahneman also wrote the book on fast thinking and slow thinking.
Okay.
And so Csikszentmihalyi is a weird name, but that's the guy's name. It's about when people are in this kind of unconscious competence state, that time sort of slows down for them and they can see things better and perceive opportunities they didn't have before.
For like the layman, when Michael Jordan says the basket looks like a big old bucket.
Right, exactly. The way you look at things literally changes. And if you've ever been in a car accident or anything really stressful, and you're like, it seems like time slowed down, or it seems like a flip book. If you've ever been in a real fight where people are trying to punch your face in, and you can see every single punch and recollection, those are kind of the times that you get that sort of stuff to happen. Jake is now able to absolutely tap into that very quickly, and it's not something you get every day. It's not something that happens all the time. For the elite athlete, it's a really bizarre phenomena. But for him to be able to access it due to our training is kind of neat. His ability to manage stress is.
Let me go back one second here. So we're saying is that he can access that aspect much better, and he has some control over accessing it, or it's just occurring.
He is now able to actually exert some control over that. So it's not just epiphenomenal. It doesn't just happen now. He's actually able to get in that headspace to actually make that happen for himself. Now, obviously, time really slow down, obviously, but your attentional mechanisms ramp up. One of the probably the best researchers in this direction would be Dr. David Eagleman. Wrote a great book called Incognito. He runs the Eagleman lab at the Baylor College of Medicine. He's also a former student of mine and a contributor as well to our program in many ways. And so he's one of the primary researchers on fear and its implications for memory and perceptual distortion. And so being able to actually tap into that headspace is, I mean, you want to talk about performance-enhancing drugs, right? Like, it's not just being stronger; it's literally having control over space and time at some level in your own mind. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I heard some monks, somebody who's very big into meditation, saying that the mind can do whatever any drug has gotten anybody anywhere. You know, like they can get, it might take a very long time, but they can get into these, you know, you can get into these states through certain techniques, and it sounds like you've kind of tapped into how to get Jake there. Able
to take his own Adderall, right? It's like, if we look at it at some level, you know, from a biochemical, neurochemical perspective, I mean, unless you're actually damaging tissue, if you're manipulating the way the mind works, you are almost always manipulating the way the mind works. Like, you're actually manipulating, you know, neurochemical balance. You might be, you know, helping with the uptake of serotonin. You might be helping with the blocking of this neurotransmitter. And the way those things work, they're fundamentally phenomena in the brain, right? I'm sure Joe Rogan can wax philosophical about the effects of dimethyltryptamine, but the fact that it's actually in the brain at all is an interesting fact. You know, that might contribute to, you know, the surreality of memory while we're actually having dreams. So there's interesting things there, but absolutely agree with that statement that you can get to a place that is, you know, drug-like in its experience. Maybe not as strong, but absolutely it's possible. I wouldn't argue that against that statement.
So and I'm sorry, I'd cut you off because I was really amazed that he can tap into that.
It's a common statement. Yeah.
Yeah. What were you? And you were going on to something else. So
So as an example, so we're, you know, he'll wear a heart monitor, and we go through very stressful things, and a part of it is about snapping from absolute distress into a clear head, clear state of mind. And, you know, he's got a resting pulse of like 45 or something. It's just ridiculous. It's actually hard to get a pulse ox reading on him because his blood pressure and his pulse is so low at rest. So we actually have to get him activated to even get a decent pulse. So the average heart monitor, you know, it shows this yellow dial of pulse, and 9 times out of 10 when he's just resting and sitting around, it won't even show up. So it's like, is it attached? Is it working? We can't really tell if it's working. So we have to actually put on, I think at about, I think it's 60, the yellow bar starts to show up. So we actually have to get him up to, you know, 60 BPM before it'll even register. So we're sitting there and we're, you know, he's going through some pretty stressful stuff. You know, I tell him to stand up, you know, focus your breathing, focus your concentration, and his pulse just starts to drop. And he runs, you know, by the time we get to him, it's 90 BPM, and it drops down to 54 in the space of the sentence.
And were there any points that you tracked this before he started training with you and see what kind of control he had over his heart rate?
No, we didn't get an opportunity as soon as we got with him. That's a pretty uncommon, like the speed of it is, it's literally like in 5 seconds to have your pulse drop 20 points is pretty uncommon.
Right, and so part of that's is just some sort of natural physiological advantage that he has?
It might be that, but it also is definitely related to his focus, because it's, you know, even when he's still doing the activity, he's able to you know, mentally bring his heart down very quickly, faster than most.
In just about every video podcast I do, I bring up Hicks and Gracie. I always try to work in Hicks and Gracie because he's the one guy that I'll believe floats, you know, and I'm fine with that, right? And when he did the Joe Rogan podcast, he talked about kind of his ability to control his breathing, but also his ability to control his heart rate. And he goes, you know, when I'm at 60, my opponent's at 80. When I'm at 80, my opponent's at 100. When I'm at 120, my opponent's at 140, and that's when I get to kill, right? So it kind of sounds like, you know, very, very similar ideas. Like, let's control the heart rate, make the other guy's heart explode, and then let's take care of business.
Right. So it's that while I'm being waterboarded, my pulse is at 60. That would be a closer statement. So, which is like, okay, that's insane, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to torture you, and at your recovery, instead of just gasping for air, you're going to exert control over the involuntary muscles in your heart.
And you're
not even worried about clearing your mind anymore. You're not worried about stress. You're just like, okay, boom, head's clear. Let's bring the pulse down. Where everyone else would be, holy crap, let me check my underwear.
Right.
Like, well, let me bring my pulse down.
So this is extremely interesting to me because one of my unfounded fears is being kidnapped and like put in a room and tortured, and I'm like, I need to be able to get to this other space mentally where I could just zone out like a monk, So
well, we'll have James grab you and bring you to a workshop. That'll satisfy everything, right?
Here's the thing. I don't think he's man enough nor big enough to do either of those. So.
Sorry, James. Maybe not big enough. Definitely.
All right, I'll give you man enough, but not big enough. So, yeah. What about is there at a certain point too much of a good thing? Can somebody do too much of this training and there have either a reduced rate of return or it kind of reversing and being having a negative effect?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, we can. To speak to one moment just before, though, I want to quote a friend of mine, a guy by the name of AJ from the Navy SEALs. And when we were talking in the early stages of this program, and he said something to me. He's like, decision making under fire is the hallmark of the professional. That being able to have a clear head when everyone else is literally being shot in theirs, right? That's where the exceptional people thrive, and it's a shitty place to get to. But he's a phenomenal individual. If you ever saw Act of Valor, he's in that movie. Great guy, just a phenomenal guy. But that's when you say that, you think about it, like, okay, that makes sense. But how do you cultivate that? Where do you get that from?
Right, and so let me ask you: do you believe that some people have that more naturally than others?
Absolutely. I wouldn't argue that at all. Absolutely believe that. People start there.
Okay.
And some people just, neurologically, biochemically, whatever it may be, people, and we can look at the sociopath, right? Those guys, you can't get them too excited about this stuff, right? Maybe unless they can, fetishize it. You look at the psychopath and concepts of remorse and decision making, bind, torture, kill, Bader. You're looking at a guy who's not going to get too worried about trying to fight somebody. Right? He's, oh, well, okay, I'll eat your face later. Those sorts of things are, there are people who can be there. But for the average individual, yeah, people have some advantage, but you don't really get to know that until you're in incredibly stressful situations.
It's funny because I've been in very few situations like this, right? That kind of like life or death. The worst I've ever kind of seen personally is almost a compound fracture of a leg in training, right? But it was off of somebody shooting in it was very early on in when I was an instructor at a school, and it was like classic wrestler versus Muay Thai guy, right? And the Muay Thai guy unfortunately broke his leg. But I'm looking around in class and everybody's just standing still, jaws dropping, right? And all I heard was it sounded like 3 baseball bats breaking, one after the other, right? And some guy screaming, and I'm like, what the fuck just happened? And, not to kind of say that I'm whatever, but my first instinct was I jump on the guy, sit cross-side on him, and just look square in his face as he's screaming in pain. And he goes, what's wrong? I go, you're fine. I go, yeah, look, they'll cast it. You'll be okay. You're good. Don't worry about it. I said, if you want, I'll choke you to sleep so you don't feel the pain. And then kind of, it was funny. I don't know how long it took, but then he went from screaming to kind of just like, is my leg pretty fucked up? And I go, yeah, you're pretty fucked, but I'm not going to let you look at it. I'm just going to sit here on your chest. It was the first and last time I was in that kind of a high stress situation.
Can I not to be that guy that gives you the other story? But right. Can I give you an example? Because this one actually, I mentioned Dutch Johnson before, Dr. Johnson, who was also a phenomenal student of mine. I broke his leg in training. I threw him, and in the process of landing, his foot got trapped between the deck and his hip, and a clean break between, it broke, pulled his leg under, and then his leg, because we were videoing it for a training video, so we never released that one. But his foot came kicking out from underneath, your floppy foot came snapping out from underneath, and he, you've heard it, that blood-curdling scream that freezes everyone's veins. lets out this grotesque scream, and like, ah! Okay, it's a clean break between Tib-Fib. I need someone to grab some padded sticks and some tape. Bring that over here, and I need to go ahead and splint this up. This is the guy whose leg I just broke. Everyone else is like, holy shit, that guy snapped in.
Wow.
And yeah, he's a beast. Also a Marine. Not even a former Marine. That guy's a Marine for life. And,
right. Yeah. No, he definitely sounds like it. That's pretty. So,
talk about being clear-headed under stress. And then, of course, because he's Dutch Johnson, he's fascinated with human injury. While the paramedics are holding his foot, he keeps sitting up to try to look at it, but his foot's staying still. So while his foot's staying still, he's got his bone on his skin is doing this sort of thing. And everyone's like, Dutch, lay down, stop doing that. He's no, it's the last time I'm going to be able to see my foot disconnected. And the paramedics are just like, dude, stop trying to look, please. And he's jabbing at the skin with the broken shard of his leg. And I was like, this is a hard son of a bitch. Right? This is that guy that you're like, oh, well, if I break a guy's arm, right, the fight's over. And I'm like, not that guy. You break that guy's arm, he's pissed. He's going to shoot you with the other one.
Yeah. As an aside, I got into a big argument with a guy who said, yeah, he would let his arm break. I go, there's very few people that would let their arm break, right? And he's like, well, who are they? I go, and I listed the guys that I've seen let it happen. I go, those are the guys that let their arm break. Everyone else just says they're going to let their arm break.
Yeah.
But, so going back to the question is there too much of a good thing?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a point where, for us, and it's something that we have to manage very carefully for the average person, you know, when we get you to a point, there's health risks involved in what we do. So we've got, you know, we're taking a pulse ox reading. We've got, you know, CO2, oxygen on site, on an oxygen concentrator on site. We've got, you know, in some situations we may need an AED on site. So there's a real legitimate risk. We have, you know, usually have a paramedic on site as well for the simulator at some level. So it's not a joke. It's very serious. So from a physical standpoint, absolutely, it's too much of a good thing. From a mental standpoint, it can be really upsetting for people. And so the recovery process, the amount of time you want to give someone before you put them back into something like this can be, I mean, it can be months before someone's really able to kind of get themselves ready to get into it. I just saw a guy yesterday, a friend of mine by the name of Maynard, and he's been through 3 times. He's phenomenal BJJ instructor. He's done a number of different traditional martial arts. He's a top-level Kali instructor, phenomenal guy at Pakit Trisha Kali. And he sends his students to me. He's like, okay, if we're going to talk about knife fighting, you're going to go through Taurus first. And then we can talk about it, because otherwise, you know, you don't know what we're really doing. So we saw him yesterday. It's been 6 months since the last workshop. He says, I'm dreading March. So we have another one in March. He's like, I'm dreading March. I don't know that I'm ready for it yet, but I'm dreading it. I'm starting to try to mentally prepare for it. So he's a guy that, you know, I wouldn't feel comfortable trying to get him into, let's say, weekly sessions. That wouldn't be good for a guy like that. Jake Ellenberger, not to go back, but, you know, as an idea here, Jake Ellenberger, we've been stuffing him into sessions 3 times a day.
And are these what you would, you know, and I still don't even know what it is yet because I haven't gone through it, but are these what we call the red turn, or what you call the red turns?
He's actually doing black turns. Yeah, it's like a level above red.
Okay.
And we're putting them through this 3 times a day. And, you know, just to give you kind of a perspective, in the first minute, other people have blacked out in the first turns. They passed out. You probably heard, you know, Josh made mention the idea that, you know, his worst fear wasn't that he would die, it's that he would die and would just keep going. That was hell. He actually felt like he tapped into hell. And, you know, this is in like the first minute of this sort of stuff. And Jake's doing 15 minutes, you know, 3 times in a day. So his mental recovery is shocking, right? This is like a batch of horror that I wouldn't wish on anybody at the level that he's doing it. Obviously, we wouldn't expose everybody to this. And,
right.
You know, soccer was not going to get this.
But you're glad you have this subject to see how this works, right?
He's like the best guinea pig ever. Like, this is like the ultimate lab rat for me. I was like, well, what else can we do to this guy? And we're just, you know, prodding him and, you know, drowning him and everything else. We're like, oh, shit, this seems to work. Let's try some more. All right, hey guys, come in here. Let's try some other things. Let's pool our resources and see if we can pay for more electricity.
Right. And okay, so there can be too much of a good thing depending on the guy. But now, you know, it comes to an interesting question. This is a living, breathing thing, right? And it's not you're going in the belly of the beast. You know, it's not an actual animal. But you know, so the new dials are added. Some dials are taken away. You know, new things are put in. Some are taken out. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we try to do our best to manage it. Part of, you know, and you know, this may be more information than will make sense to anybody right now, but there's an idea of the obvious curriculum and kind of the hidden curriculum. So the obvious curriculum when you come through for a workshop is on day one, you're learning the stuff that we're teaching you. But we're not really teaching you the techniques that you think you're getting. We're actually teaching you how the format works so that we can actually get you into the simulator. And so we're kind of trying to, you know, assess where you are and try to figure out, okay, you know, who should go first, who should, you know, what level they need, what level they're, you know, physically, cardiac, capacities, things like that. We're trying to figure that stuff out on day one so that we can give you a good experience as opposed to having a nightmare hell ride.
No, that's pretty. You know, a lot of this resonates with me because, like, it just from a self-defense or just a jiu-jitsu teaching or kickboxing teaching standpoint, it's like sometimes I'll teach people movements that they're not fighting, they're not related to what they're going to be doing, but the movement informs what the move is, right? It gets their body kind of ready. Okay, well now, I didn't realize that now I can do an arm lock. Yeah, asshole, because I taught you these 3 different things that now make it easier for you to do an arm lock, because when I learned how to do an arm lock, all they did was teach me how to do an arm lock rather than teaching my body how to move so that I can do an arm lock.
Right. It's one of those things. There is something about the student that comes in, they want to have the specifics. They want, okay, I want you to cover this, teach me that, and you're like, that is cool, but that's not really what you need to know. Like as an instructor with more visibility on the totality of the program, you can say, yeah, we're gonna do that, but first you're gonna paint this fence, right? We're gonna
back to Miyagi. It always goes back to Miyagi.
It always comes back to Miyagi. No, but it's that idea that like you need to understand how this stuff works. Because if we just focus on those details, you won't understand what exactly you're missing. It won't be there for you. And so if you only try to execute what I'm showing you, you don't have the other stuff built in. You don't have the framework.
Right, and that's a problem within the martial arts because people believe that they're paying for a series. They're paying for moves is what they kind of really, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of students are paying you for moves.
Right. Yeah, I refer to that as trafficking in lessons. You know, I spent it, you know, so just kind of give you some background on Taurus. I got asked by a federal agency to develop this program to replace their boxing training and their knife defense. And I was like, okay, well, let me, you know, and I like to joke about this in workshops. Is, you know, my answer to that was, okay, I'm not going to sell you what I have. I'm going to go figure out what you need, right? And trying to, you know, address the students' actual needs. Which is the stupidest move possible. Like I totally could have sold them whatever it was I had written or old videos. I could have sold that shit instantly. And instead I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna look this up. So I called them back like 5 years later, and I was like, okay, I got the answer. And they're like, we've had a total change of management since we talked to you. But in the interim, you know, I went and I tried to look at as many different training programs as I could possibly find. And I, you know, talked to everybody I knew who'd ever even punched somebody, or been punched, and usually been punched as well. And I asked everything and looked at every single program I could find. And so many schools in so many different martial arts, so many different training formats. We're like, okay, you're going to get this lesson, and you're going to get this lesson, and then you're going to get this lesson, and then you're like, well, do these relate? No, not at all. Don't worry about it. You know, you're going to get more lessons. Like, oh, sweet, I'm going to get more lessons. And so they start to get everything about the format puts a premium on the lessons, not on skills development. Those are two totally different things. Just lessons. And you're like, oh shit, well, the pearls of wisdom must be the lessons. And so like, I need to learn more lessons, or you're looking over at those guys' lessons, like just trying to watch those, like, whoa, don't crib lessons, like that's too advanced for you, you're not ready for that.
Or you're gonna have to pay, that's a higher payment structure.
Yeah, you're not wearing a blue gi, you need to buy the blue gi. So yeah, exactly, a totally different payment structure, you know, after you've paid for a number of belt tests. And what you end up finding is that the actual student themselves is on the back burner. Like if we really identify how training's supposed to work, and I mean this like in a Kusmina sort of, what's the focus of education?
There's going to be a little bubble that comes up. I don't know what the fuck Kusmina is, but hopefully he'll explain it.
Sorry. So it's a Russian educational professor. If we look at, there's let's say 5 different things in training, and I'm going to kind of give you kind of this loose Bespalko, Kusmina, Popovsky model. So this will help you out there, right?
Right. Popovsky used to play for the Colorado Avalanche. I know who he is.
Okay, so yeah, he's a Russian guy. So that much we know. Actually, these are all 3 Russians. But I'm going to give you like a real base overview of this idea. There's 5 basic things. You've got your student. You've got your foundational skills. You've got your relationships between the instructors and other students as well. You've got the actual information of the program. And you've got the goals, like why the student's actually involved in this thing. So these 5 things are in play. 9 times out of 10, if not 99 times out of 10, out of 100, you'll go someplace and the focus is on either the instructor or the information. Those are the 2 things you'll get. Why am I here? I'm here to get the information.
Right.
Why am I here? I'm here because you're a kick-ass instructor, or you're a god among men. I'm going to take lessons from Helio Gracie himself. I'm going to tell everyone that I took lessons from Helio Gracie. I'm not going to talk about, what my day was like. I'm going to talk about what Helio did because he's a luminary. So people go and train with people because of who they are, or they go and train for stuff because of what the information is, and it's kind of fucked up. They're not doing the job right.
Well,
It's
funny. As kind of like a school owner, I kind of, and I've been teaching martial arts for a long time, and I've seen kind of, it's funny because we could talk about how instructors or the business owners aren't giving the student what they should have, but sometimes the students kind of do it to themselves as well, right? Especially if you're an instructor, and it just recently happened in my case where I had to sit down with one of my students after another student who was very dedicated, very good left, basically because he didn't get promoted. Right, and his friend came to me and we sat down and we talked, and I said, look, man, he's like, I don't care about getting you your next belt. I care about getting you better. That's what I don't think about, getting you better so that I can promote you. I think about getting you better so that you're better. That's the thing. But it's, martial arts schools and different, tight-knit communities get very weird about that kind of stuff. And I said, look, you're not coming to the wrong guy if you're worried about belts, because it took me a very long time to get my black belt. When I got my blue belt, it took me over 4 years. My purple belt, I was the suckiest purple belt. Brown belt, I was the suckiest brown belt. And when I got my black belt, well, who's a black belt? Me, motherfucker, because I stuck through and I was able to kind of make it happen. So don't come and complain. Are you better than when you started? Yes, that's my focus. But sometimes people care about the piece of tape or the color of the strap around their waist.
Right. What is his name? I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. I'm great with Russian names. I can't remember a Japanese name. Look at Jura, the guy who started judo, right?
Jigoro Kano.
Kano, thank you. So Kano, he stole the idea from a swim team, right? I mean, like if we look at really where the belts come from, we're all dressing up like we're fucking swimmers.
There's your robe, right? Yeah.
I got a robe and I got a swim belt that dictates that I'm a better student I'm at a different level than those other guys. So if you really want to put a premium, go take a swim class if you really want a belt. And it's like, if that's really what the focus is. And then, so if you look at this, that would be in the Kusmina Bespalko Popovsky model.
Popovsky, don't forget about Popovsky.
That would be the goal. That would be the goal right there. And then actually Vyacheslav Popovsky, former pedagogical chair of the Let's Institute in St. Petersburg, is actually a partner of mine. He's the associate director of instructional design for Taurus.
Oh, I knew that. I've done a ton of research.
I know you did your research. So this model of his is absolutely at the core of what we're doing at Taurus, and the focus on the students focused on the goals. For that student, it's something that he should have been. This kind of gets into a discussion about obvious and hidden or what I referred to in the past as shadow criteria. That there's the obvious criteria, like, okay, do I have a belt? Can I do the lessons? Can I do these things? And there's the shadow criteria, what you're really evaluating, which is, yeah, but are you any better?
I kind of, as an aside, right? I took responsibility for this whole thing because he left. I didn't have any idea he was going to leave, and the guys love the guy. If he wants to come back, his door's always open, right? But
wherever you are, come back, right?
Right. No. But I mean, But I was just like, the second he's not about being with us, I'm moving on. I didn't even ask him why he left, right? He called me, and I was like, okay, cool. Good luck with your new school, right? Just kind of, you've cut me out of the decision, so I don't feel the need to ask you why. But I told my other students, I said, I'm responsible for this occurring because I didn't help him empower himself enough to come to me to ask me the question on why he's not getting promoted, because this is important to him, because he was in my mind, too afraid of endangering his position at the school by asking that question. And so the decision that he took was, I'm just going to leave and start fresh somewhere else, which is, hey, he's well within his rights to do. And I actually, part of me is like, hey, you know what, man, you had the balls to do it, go for it, and I wish you success. But it was an interesting kind of thing that occurred.
Well, if we're pointing the fingers for blame for that, then yes, it was your fault, absolutely. But the fault lies at the early stages with that student, which is about managing expectations as they come in, about understanding. This is what I meant about the obvious and the shadow. You know what you're evaluating, but you need to make those things explicit.
100%. Yeah, no, and this going back to the nunchaku or the tip of the spear guy, right? It's just kind of like, hey, this is what we do, and this is how we're going to do it, and I need to do a better job of relaying that kind of, not being the guy at the top of the mountain that nobody can talk to or afraid to talk to.
Right, and that's absolutely. But that's that's the difference between you and the average bear. Is you actually are, a self-evaluatory and self-introspective enough to actually be able to see where those issues are. The average instructor would be like, well, fuck that guy. He doesn't know what he's doing.
Right. Well, part of me says fuck that guy doesn't know what he's doing because he's not training with us. But the other part of it is like, I fucked up too. But I'd be a terrible business owner. More importantly, martial arts instructor, if I don't learn from my failings, right? That's how I failed my way to black belt. I didn't succeed my way to black belt.
Well, that's all this stuff, right? Is we blow it enough to push ourselves up, right? We're standing on top of this mound of our former errors.
Yeah.
And it makes us better. Not because we're any really technically any better. It's just because we have an improved vantage point by staying on top of all of these errors that are piled up below. Yeah.
Hey, Torren, I got to wrap it up just because I'm losing a little bit of steam because this is I say this a lot, but this has truly probably been one of the more eye-opening and interesting conversations, but also really good for me because most of the people that I talk to, I know to a certain degree. I have some sort of connection, and you and I, up until I had no idea. We didn't know each other a week ago, and what I really appreciate was the level of candor and frankness that we were able to have this conversation with, and I think we accomplished a lot of things by opening my eyes, and when people watch this and listen, opening their eyes to what it is they really need to be thinking about and looking for. So I thank you for being on the show.
Here, it's my pleasure. It's great speaking with you. I know you and I are going to have more conversations in the future, just between the two of us.
For sure, yeah. No, I'm hooked. I need to see this thing through.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the end of it. I'll get a video interview with you as well, post simulator. So you
yes,
can
that would be great.
I imagine it was going to be. Yeah. So we look forward to that.
Thank you so much for being on.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Professor. Take care.